All right, good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to go ahead and just do a kind of brief lesson here on Punnett Square. So hopefully this is kind of a recap for a lot of you guys. So because I know you've all done Punnett Squares before. So in biology, we're just going to go into a little bit more detail on it. All right, so let's go ahead and start out. So before we get into the actual Punnett Square, a couple terms we need to go over. So first of all, you have what is called a genotype, which are two letters next to each other. Each letter represents a specific trait, and then depending on how they're paired up is going to show how they're expressed, whether it's a dominant trait or a recessive trait. So anytime you see that term genotype, it's just a pair of letters like this example right here. So and a genotype is made up of two, I say letters, but they're called alleles. So that's an allele, that's an allele. Capital letters, capital alleles represent a dominant genotype, dominant trait, and then lowercase would be a recessive one. And then depending on how they're paired up, it's going to determine which trait is actually expressed. So as long as you have one capital letter, one dominant allele, the dominant trait's going to be expressed. Okay, the only way to have a recessive trait is if there are two recessive alleles. So if there was two little r's here, then the recessive trait would be expressed. All right, so genotype, I already went over that. It's a set of alleles that represents a specific trait. Phenotype, just think of this as it's the physical appearance. So if you have a genotype of big W, little w, which is for widow's peak. So big W represents the dominant trait of having a widow's peak. Little w would be having a straight hairline. The capital W basically wins out. So this individual would have a widow's peak. Widow's peak is the phenotype, okay? So genotype, big W, little w, phenotype, widow's peak. If it was two little w's, like this example right here, then the phenotype would be straight hairline. Okay, so those genotypes, they're again, the two letters, the two alleles, if they're two capital, if they're two lowercase, or if they're one of each, there's a name for that you'll see in the problems you're going to get. So the first one is homozygous. That prefix homo means the same. So this is when both the alleles are the same. So you either have two capital W's or two lowercase w's, or whatever other letter represents. The specific letter doesn't really matter. Sometimes it's called purebred. So if it's two capital W's, that's what we call homozygous dominant. Obviously, the dominant trait is going to be expressed. If it's two lowercase, it's either homozygous recessive, or we just call it recessive. In the word problems, it's going to just say the recessive trait, or it'll say white flowers is or red flowers is dominant to white flowers. So you have to kind of figure out that means that the white is going to be recessive. It might not explicitly say which one is dominant, which one is recessive. You have to figure it out just kind of reading it. Okay, and then heterozygous, heteromy is different. So this would be when you have one of each, you have one capital, one lowercase. So this is sometimes it's also called a hybrid. But again, the dominant trait's going to be expressed. Okay, even though there's a recessive allele there, the dominant one's going to be expressed. There are exceptions to this rule, which we'll get into later in a different lesson. But for the most part, that's all you need to worry about. All right, and then so the actual Punnett Square, pretty simple. I'm pretty sure all you guys know how to fill this out, but you're going to be given the genotype of the father, so that goes on the top of the Punnett Square. Then you get the genotype of the mother, that goes on the side, or vice versa. It really doesn't matter. Just make sure you put, so if you have big X, little x is the father's genotype, or the father is heterozygous for a trait, you put that on the top. And then same thing, mother goes on the side. So in this example, both parents are heterozygous. So that then you kind of just fill out your Punnett Square. So this goes down here, that big X goes here, that big X goes here. Okay, and then this big X goes here, this little x goes here. Okay, that's just how you do all of them. And then so in this example, you have what's called a 3-to-1 ratio. So 3 of these boxes, or 75% of the boxes, are going to have the dominant trait. one box or 25% is going to have the recessive trait. So that means the chances, so if these parents had offspring, this is the chance that they would have this specific trait, whatever this trait could be. So there'd be a 75% chance they'd have this dominant trait, 25% chance they would have the recessive trait. That's what it means. All right, I'm going to go ahead and, since that didn't take too long, I'm going to go ahead and go over to the next lesson, which I think is just other methods of inheritance. So the exceptions to that rule. Okay, so this is going to be called non-Mendelian genetics. All right, now there's a lot of different types of non-Mendelian genetics. So that last thing we just went over, that's what's called complete dominance. So that's when you have a dominant allele, it's just going to completely dominate the recessive one. So other exceptions to that rule, there's what we call codominance, which is just as it sounds. So this is when you'd have two dominant alleles, two different dominant alleles that are going to be expressed. So instead of having like big A, little a, you could have like big A and then big B or something like that. Blood type is an example because people can be blood type A, they can be blood type B, or they can be blood type AB. Okay, polygenic inheritance. You're not going to have to do any Punnett squares with this. Don't worry about it. The other one, yes, it's possible. So polygenic, that prefix poly means many, and then genic, think genes. So many genes. So this is when a trait is influenced by many, many different genes. So this is going to be common on things that have much more variety, like hair color or skin color or height. Okay, it's not a simple dominant recessive trait. It's just there's multiple different genes involved, so you can't do a simple Punnett square on that. Okay, and then there's what's called multiple alleles. So normally there's just two alleles, like big A, little I. So multiple alleles would if you have another allele, another thing in there. So that gives a lot more variety. This is also included in blood type too, because blood type you also have your proteins, your positive, your negatives in there as well. And then incomplete dominance. So incomplete dominance is just as it sounds. So normally when it's heterozygous, so big A, little a, or in this example, big R, little r, normally it would just be the red trait being expressed because the red is dominant. But when it's incomplete dominance, these two are going to mix together, and that's going to be pink in that particular example. So the Punnett square is still the exact same. You just read the phenotypes differently. So again, instead of being 100% red, it's going to be 100% pink. You can still end up with white flowers. If it was two little R's, you can still end up with red flowers if it's two big R's, but you also have that added phenotype of pink. I think that's it. Oh, okay. Then we got sex-linked traits. So sex-linked trait are specific. So all of what we've been talking about are on what's called autosomes, which are pretty much all the chromosomes in your body. And then sex chromosomes are the very last two. They are represented by two X chromosomes for a girl, or an X and Y chromosome for a boy. And then these are just genetic traits that are specifically linked to just these chromosomes. So they're going to affect individuals differently. So something like color blindness or hemophilia, they're going to affect males more just for that reason, because males have a Y chromosome and then females have two X chromosomes. All right, and I think that's it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pop off. You guys have a good day.